Hi folks, I'm Chris and I collect vintage science fiction paperbacks, and these are some of the lovely gems I bagged in the first few weeks of January 2026. And most of these books actually have come from Zardos books, the wonderful Zardos books. I'm very lucky to live fairly nearby. So do check them out. They have a great website and a shop, and I'll put the details in the blurb below. But let's start with absolutely beautiful gem. I keep saying this, but look at this. This is an absolutely beautiful Ballantine edition of The Trouble with Lichen by John Wyndham from 1960. This isn't quite a paperback original. It was published, I think, at exactly the same time in the US as a paperback with the hardback in the UK. And it has this absolutely beautiful cover, wonderful cover by Richard Powers. And it's in such great condition. It looks like he could just have gone into the shelf in 1960 and bought it. It's absolutely beautiful. And the story, I think, is very well known, John Wyndham's story, where a group of scientists actually accidentally discover that the kind of compound from lichen can extend human life somewhere between 200 and 300 years. And they kind of work out how to use this in the best way. And rather than putting it on the market, they open up a chain of beauty spas for women to ensure that kind of women have some power. So a kind of early proto-feminist novel, perhaps, from John Wyndham, but absolutely beautiful edition. Next up is three lovely Ace books from the early 60s. This is the first one, is this, look at this, The Greatest Adventure by John Taine, with a wonderful cover by Ed M. Schwiller. Look at that dinosaur there, or some kind of dinosaur creature. John Taine, of course, is the kind of mathematician Eric Bell, but he wrote numerous science fiction stories. This is actually originally from 1929, but this is the 1960 Ace edition. And it's a kind of lost world story. Some travelers in Antarctica discover this lost world where dinosaurs and plant life has continued to evolve and has become dangerous to humanity. Wonderful kind of 1930s science fiction story, adventure story. Next up is this great story from Murray Leinster, The Forgotten Planet. It's a kind of beautiful copy, but unfortunately, as you can see, it has some damage there across the front cover. And there's always the question when you find a book like this, quite a rare book, but it isn't in the best condition. Do you pick it up and hope to find a better copy later, or do you just leave it behind? So obviously in this case, you can see I've picked it up hoping to find a better copy, but it's still rather nice. And it's a Rob Schwartz cover, is the cover artist. And it kind of tells the story of a planet previously seeded by humans with plant and insect life, and then the planet was forgotten about. And then decades later, or hundreds of years later, humans crash land onto the planet and discover that the kind of life has evolved, and there are kind of ants the size of wolves and flies the size of chickens and giant wasps, as you can see on the cover. So a great story. So this is from 1961, this edition. And then finally, the third Ace is this Marion Zimmer Bradley first edition from 1964 of her. This is called The Bloody Sun, and it's the kind of first of a series of books set in what she calls her Darkover series. It's the planet of Darkover, where kind of humans arrive. And the series tells the story of the relationship between the inhabitants of Darkover and the new arrivals. and it's kind of fantasy, I think, rather more than science fiction. But nice to have this first edition of the first book in that series. Next up, we have a pair, two Harlan Ellisons, both short story collections. This is from 1973, All the Sounds of Fear, and with a kind of immediately recognizable, I think, cover by Chris Foss of this Panther edition. And I'm really pleased to get this because it has a story that is well renowned, one that I've been wanting to read for some time. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. So very much looking forward to reading that short story by Harlan Ellison. And the next one is another collection, an earlier collection by Harlan Ellison, From the Land of Fear. And this is in Belmont Science Fiction, with cover by Diane and Leo Dillon. And this is from 1967 and is the first edition of this book. And the back cover actually gives a little biography of Harlan Ellison from 67. And it says, at 13, he ran away from home to join the carnival. At 15, he was driving a dynamite truck in Northern California. At 19, he was thrown out of college, and at 21, he sold his first novel. So that's a fictional biography of Harlan Ellison. Who knows with Harlan Ellison? So there we go. Two lovely books. Next up, we go back quite some way to 1952. Well, this is a 1952 edition, Cherry Tree Books, of this J.M. Walsh story, Voyage to Neptune. So the story is from 1932, and it tells of a kind of routine spaceship trip to Mars that goes wrong, and the spaceship crash lands onto Neptune, and they're amongst the first people to arrive on Neptune. And they have a good relationship with the inhabitants, but get involved in this battle with these kind of giant frog-like creatures that you can see on the cover. And it's a bit of a fragile book, so I've got it in a bag, so forgive the glare. But very happy to have this. This is one of about I think a dozen or so books that they produced, Cherry Tree, in this fantasy books edition. So yeah, I'm going to be looking out for more of those, definitely. And then next we have one of my perhaps my all-time favorite science fiction novel. This is Earth Abides by George R. Stewart from 1949. I read this when I was very young. I've read it many, many times. It's absolutely great story. If you don't know this, if you haven't read this, please pause this video, go on to eBay or whatever, and buy a copy of this book. You'll really, really enjoy it, I promise. And I do try to collect all the editions of this. There's one particular edition, American Ace from 1952, that I'm looking out for. I don't have. But this is the British Corgi edition from 1979. The Gino D'Achilla cover, if you can see that there. And the story is, of course, that there's a plague that wipes out most of humanity, and a small group of survivors try to rebuild, and it's of, the story of how it moves on many, many generations, and a great story. Then we have this World Distributors Limited, or Console edition, which is a kind of UK publisher from the 50s and 60s, which I really like. I try to pick up all the science fiction World Distributors Limited books, and they kind of did a mixture of reprints from the US of kind of well-known novels, science fiction novels. They publish many different types of genre fiction: crime, detective, mystery, and also science fiction. So obviously I concentrate on the science fiction books. So they did a mixture of reprints, but also originals. They published their own. So this is a reprint from the US. And in fact, I have the US edition, first edition, in Pyramid. And when I say reprint, you can see, I mean, it's literally reprinted exactly the cover. And why not? It's a wonderful Richard Powers cover. So the first is a Pyramid book from 1959, and this is Console WGL from 1961. And it's a different size, so they've reset the text and has a different rear cover. But yeah, very much what you would call a reprint. And then to show you their other books, the next book I got is another Console, slightly later. This is from 1963, and it's 4 shillings, so quite expensive. And I didn't know much about this writer. I looked him up, and he seems, according to ISFDB, to be the only book he wrote. And the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction wasn't very complimentary about him. And this is a kind of, it says this is a kind of routine story of a trip to Mars and the adventures therein. So yeah, so Ernest J. Blow, we salute you. And then next up is James White, The Aliens Among Us. James White is a Northern Irish writer who wrote many of his stories and novels were set in this kind of university created sector general hospital universe, kind of like a space station, medical space station that and where there was lots of contact with aliens. It's kind of a little bit Star Trek-ish, I guess. But I picked this up as soon as I saw it for the wonderful Josh Kirby cover. Look at that alien there. Absolutely terrific. And this is from 1970. As I say, the Corgi edition. This is the first paperback edition. Next up, we have In the Drift, which is by Michael Swanwick. I didn't know this novel. I know Stations of the Tide is a novel I know he wrote. And this is the kind of Ace special science fiction edition. And Ace published quite a few good books in this livery here, this kind of computer screen, 80s computer screen livery. And the cover is by Ron Liederman. And this is from 1985, this edition. And this, it's a sort of alternative history, possibly story, set in the 3 Mile Island nuclear almost catastrophe in our universe. It didn't quite turn into, thank goodness, nuclear meltdown, but in this story it does, and renders much of the United States uninhabitable. And this is kind of generations later what has happened to the people following this nuclear disaster. So the kind of reviews are mixed, with one saying really this book is only for post-apocalyptic diehards, and that's me. So I will probably give this a read at some point. Next up we have Things, an anthology of story edited by Ivan Howard in this Mayflower Dell edition, with a cover by Jeff Jacks, and the book's from 1965. And this kind of celebrates, I suppose, or notes the kind of intersection really between science fiction and horror, or that wing, if you like, of science fiction. And it's got some really notable authors in it: Lester Del Rey, James Blish, Paul Anderson, Damian Knight. So yeah, kind of looking forward to dipping into things at some point. Next up, we have three novels by David Compton, D.G. Compton. And this is the first one I've been very much looking forward to. I've been reading a little bit about David Compton, D.G. Compton, and his stories. I don't know them very well. This is supposed to be one of the best, Farewell Earth's Bliss, and tells the story of a group of convicts, prisoners, sent to this dystopian planet, this kind of prison world, if you like, and how they try to integrate into that world. And the reviews say this is more of a kind of character study. It isn't particularly plot driven, but is very highly recommended by reviewers. It kind of reminds me a little bit the story of Hawksbill Station by Robert Silverberg, a great novel, one I really like, again about a group of prisoners sent off to the past in that case, but this is to a new world in this case. So again, a story to look forward to. And this is Chris Achilles' cover from 1967. Then we have The Electric Crocodile. This is the Arrow edition from 1973. Don't know who the cover artist is, unknown, unfortunately. I know that in the US, this was released as The Steel Crocodile. And I tried to find out why there's a change of title here in the UK to The Electric Crocodile, but I couldn't find out. If by any chance you know why the title was changed, please do put a comment down below. It'd be really interesting to know why the title was changed. And it tells the story of a group of scientists working in a kind of dystopian future, and they have this kind of intelligent, what they call a crocodile. Kind of seems to be a kind of computerish AI, possibly machine that they're interacting with. So yeah, interesting. And then the third book from D.G. Compton is Chronicles. And this is in the kind of Arrow edition from 1976 with a David Bergen cover. Really good cover there. Look at that. And again, this seems to have had different titles in the UK than in the US. It was spelt Chronocules with an O in the US and Chronicules with an I here in the UK. Was that a mistake, or was it deliberately done? And even more intriguingly, this book was released with possibly the weirdest, possibly the longest ever title under a different edition. It was released as, and I quote, aspirin tablets, the sandpaper sides of used matchboxes, and something that might have been castor oil. That was the title it was released under in a different edition. So a very curious book about time travel, partly about time travel and partly, again, another character study. So really interesting science fiction novels there from David Compton. The next one, or I've got about 5 left actually, and they're all kind of products of their time, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all, but rather that they very much reflect the culture and content of their time. So this is Ossian's Way by Fred Hoyle. This is the Berkeley edition from 1961, with a great Richard Powers cover. Again, that wonderful Richard Powers. So Fred Hoyle was a very well-known, renowned astronomer, astrophysicist, and but also wrote a great deal of science fiction novels. I have many of his novels in Penguin editions, but I hadn't heard of this one at all. and it kind of tells the story of, set in slightly in the future, obviously from 1961, of a kind of dystopian island, but it's very wealthy because it has this high-tech science and technology area that's been built up in Ireland, and it's very secretive and nobody knows where it's come from. And so the story tells of a British secret agent sent across to Ireland in the 1970s to discover what's going on at this technology centre. So again, it's a product of its time. It's really written before the Troubles as we know them. So a kind of interesting snapshot into time there. Then we have this 1990s collection of stories by Bruce Sterling called Global Head. This is from Millennium, the publisher Millennium, with a cover by Peter Goodnass, as you'll see. And Bruce Sterling, again, is one of the kind of known, I think, as one of the kind of cyberpunk writers. Certainly The Artificial Kid and Schematrix, two of his novels that I know of were kind of set in this world. But he's very much possibly disowning cyberpunk, or says that these stories go beyond cyberpunk or leave cyberpunk behind, this collection of stories. So this will be really interesting to dip into. And then we have this incredibly wacky 1970 cover of Clifford D. Semek's Cosmic Engineers. Look at that. I don't know if you can tell how colourful that is, that cover by Del Sartre. And so this is the 1970 paperback library edition. This is Clifford Semek's first published novel, actually, from 1959, although this is the 1970 edition. And it's actually based, that 59 novel was based on a short story he wrote in 1939. So it kind of goes back a long way and has some history. And always interesting to read the debut novel of a well-known science fiction writer. This story involves a couple of journalists it's set in the far future, journalists riding around in a spaceship, as journalists do in the far future. And they discover a spaceship, what they think is an abandoned spaceship, but it turns out it has a genius scientist exiled from the Earth in suspended animation inside. And meanwhile, when they arrive at Pluto with this exiled genius, they discover that threatening signals have been coming from outside the solar system. So yeah, a really great story from its time. And look at that 1970s cover. Wonderful. Two more. We have two more left. This, firstly, is really interesting. Very happy to have this. This is the Space Time Journal, a kind of short story collection edited by Judith Merril. And this was published famously in 1968 as England Swings SF. It was Judith Merril bringing new wave science fiction. Most of the writers, most of the stories came from the pages of New Worlds magazine. And this was an acclaimed, famous compendium of a collection of anthology, of short stories back in '68. So this is the first UK publication of that. A couple of years later, 1972. They obviously changed the title, maybe because England Swings was a bit dated by 1972, or maybe they just felt it wasn't appropriate for the English audience. And some of the stories were dropped, maybe for copyright reasons. I know one of the stories famously is the assassination of John F. Kennedy as a downhill ski racer. That's not in here, interestingly. So yeah, very happy to have this. I'm looking out for a copy of the 1968 Ace edition. but nice to have this meanwhile. And then finally, we have this lovely copy, the first UK publication in paperback of The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, with, unfortunately, well, a beautiful cover image there, but again, unfortunately, an unsung hero. We don't know who that is. And I've mentioned before, I think, I have a bit of an ambivalent relationship with Kurt Vonnegut. He is an acclaimed writer, and I'm sure he's somebody that I should like and appreciate. I haven't particularly got on with the stories he's written, that I've read of his so far. What I've read about this one is it is quite a difficult read. So perhaps this is not the one to persuade me to read more Kurt Vonnegut. But I'm very happy to have this first UK publication paperback of this, The Sirens of Titan. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed these gems. Please, if this is the first time you looked at this, do subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.